My name is Anna Wilson, whose name has been changed. I am a simple girl who often visits an ancient church in New Orleans, Louisiana. This church is very beautiful, with impressive Gothic architecture, magnificent stained glass windows, and a solemn, peaceful atmosphere. I usually come here to find tranquility, or sometimes participate in the church's volunteer activities. This church has a very long history, and like many old buildings in New Orleans, it carries a very unique atmosphere, a blend of ancient beauty and something a little mysterious. There is an area at the end of the church, or in an old, rarely used annex. That area is usually darker, quieter than the main part of the church. And there is a room. That room is located at the end of a narrow hallway, always closed. The old wooden door looks like it hasn't been opened in a long time. There is no room name sign, just a silent door in a hidden corner. Every time I walk past that room, I feel a strange unease. The air around the room seems colder than in other parts of the church. There is an eerie silence, as if the room is holding some kind of secret. I don't know what that room is used for, or why it is empty and locked. I simply stay away from it. The ancient church and that hidden corner have become a part of my visits. And the secret behind that silent door always makes me feel curious and a little shiver. On a spring afternoon in 2024, as I was helping to clean up in the area at the end of the church, I walked past that abandoned room again. As usual, I felt the cold air radiating from the old wooden door. I stopped for a moment, staring at the door, and I didn't know that the secret behind that door was about to be revealed. And it was more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. My curiosity about the abandoned room at the end of the church hallway grew stronger. Every time I walked past it, I felt an urge to know what was hidden behind that old wooden door. I often walked past that room when going to the old storage area behind the church, or when using less frequented paths. And then, I started to hear a sound from inside the abandoned room. At first, it was just a very faint sound, a creaking, like the old floorboards making noise when someone walked on them. Footsteps, light footsteps, walking around in the empty room. My heart suddenly beat faster. Was there someone in there? I stopped, listening. The footsteps continued, walking around in the room. Slowly, I thought perhaps it was a church staff member in there, checking or cleaning, but I had never seen anyone go into that room. I tried to look through the crack in the door, if any, or through a small window, if any, but saw nothing. The room inside was pitch dark. The following days, when walking past that room, I heard the footsteps again. Always there. When I walked by, the footsteps didn't sound hurried. They were steady, slow, like someone walking around in sadness or thought. I felt a little uneasy. Why were there always footsteps in this abandoned and locked room? I thought about asking others in the church, but I was afraid they would think I was strange for paying attention to an abandoned room. Sounds from behind the door, footsteps from the abandoned room, increasingly made me feel puzzled and a little scared. I started avoiding walking past that room more. But sometimes, I still had to go through there. And the footsteps were always there, behind the old wooden door, like a terrifying invitation, like a secret trying to get out. I didn't know that the footsteps were just the beginning of much more terrifying things. The footsteps from the abandoned room at the end of the church hallway became clearer and more haunting. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The initial curiosity had turned into real worry and fear. Every time I walked past, I stopped, listening. The footsteps were still there. Steady, slow, and then, along with the footsteps, I started hearing another sound. Much more terrifying. Crying. The crying of a girl. The crying was very faint. Weak, but very clear. It sounded very sad, very painful, and a little bit desperate. It sounded like someone trying to suppress their pain, but unable to. It echoed from inside the abandoned room, piercing through the old wooden door. I stood there, frozen in fear. My heart pounded. Footsteps and crying. That room wasn't just empty. There was something in there. A girl crying. But who was it? Why was she crying in an abandoned and locked room? I felt a sudden cold draft radiating from the room. Stronger than ever. That cold penetrated my bones, sending shivers down my spine. The sorrow from behind the door seemed very real. I tried to push the door, but it was tightly locked. I called softly, "Is anyone in there?" But there was no answer. Only the footsteps still walking and the crying still faintly echoing. I quickly ran away from that area. Ran away from the footsteps and the terrifying crying. I knew that something was wrong with that room. That terrifying crying haunted me. I couldn't forget the sound of that sadness and despair. I started avoiding the area at the end of the church as much as possible. But curiosity and worry still clung to me. I wondered, who was the girl crying in that room? What happened to her? Why was she there? Those questions kept swirling in my head. Footsteps and terrifying crying. The abandoned room at the end of the church hallway wasn't just a hidden corner. It was the dwelling place of a sorrowful secret. And I knew that I needed to find out about that secret. Sorrow from behind the door was waiting to be revealed. The strange and terrifying phenomena from the abandoned room at the end of the church, the footsteps and the crying, became unbearable. I knew I had to find out the truth behind it. I decided to ask one of the church's priests. I sought out Father Michael, whose name has been changed. An old, kind priest who had served at this church for a very long time. I hoped he would know about the history of that room. I went to see Father Michael in his office. A small, quiet room, with the smell of old books and a faint scent of incense. I sat down across from Father Michael, feeling a little hesitant. I didn't know where to start, and I was afraid he wouldn't believe what I said. "Hello, Father Michael," I said softly. "Hello, my child, Anna." Father Michael smiled. "Do you need to talk about something?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Father," I said, "I want to ask about a room at the end of the hallway. That abandoned room." The smile on Father Michael's lips suddenly faded. His face became serious. "Ah, that room," Father Michael said softly. His voice lowered. He looked into space, as if remembering. "Have you heard anything, or seen anything there?" Father Michael asked, looking straight into my eyes. I nodded. "Yes, Father. I heard footsteps, and crying from inside." Father Michael was silent for a moment. He sighed, a heavy sigh. "I know," Father Michael said softly. "You're not the first person to hear those things." He looked at me, his eyes full of sadness and a little bit of fear. "Anna," Father Michael said, "that room carries a story. A very sad story. A tragic story." He paused, as if considering whether to tell it or not. "It's not a happy story." Father Michael continued. It is related to a tragedy that happened here many years ago. The seriousness and mystery in Father Michael's words sent shivers down my spine. I knew I was about to hear something horrifying. "Father, can you tell me about it?" I asked softly, my voice trembling. Father Michael looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "All right," Father Michael said. "I will tell you about the secret of that room. About the poor girl who died there." The old priest's account of the secret behind the door had begun. The truth about the sorrow from behind the door was about to be revealed. And I knew that my life would never be the same after hearing that story. Father Michael began to tell the story of the abandoned room at the end of the hallway. His voice was deep, but full of sorrow and sadness. "Many years ago, Anna," Father Michael said, "in this church, there was a young nun. She was very beautiful, very kind, and very devout." He paused, looking towards the end of the hallway. "Her name was Sister Agnes," Father Michael said, "whose name has been changed. She dedicated her whole life to serving God, helping others, doing good works as instructed by God." Father Michael sighed. "But there was a man, a young man. He fell in love with Sister Agnes." He looked at me, his eyes full of sadness. Sister Agnes did not accept his feelings. She had chosen a life dedicated to God. She explained it to him. Father Michael shook his head. "But that young man's love turned into obsession." He continued, his voice softer, full of dread. "One night, when everyone was asleep, that young man snuck into the church. He found his way to Sister Agnes's room. It's the room where you heard the noises." My heart beat faster. "What happened?" He did something terrible," Father Michael said, his voice slightly trembling. He raped Sister Agnes." Hearing this, I shivered violently. A horrible crime, happening right inside the church. In that very room. The poor girl. After that incident, she was in great despair. Father Michael said, tears in his eyes. She felt ashamed, hopeless. He looked towards the end of the hallway, where the abandoned room was. In her ultimate sadness and torment, Father Michael said softly, she took her own life. Right in that room. The tragedy of the poor nun. Death in the sacred room. Her spirit, Sister Agnes, was trapped there. The truth about the footsteps and the crying. Her footsteps, still walking around in the room where she lived and died. Her crying, the pain and despair still echoing. I sat there, listening to Father Michael's story. A mixture of fear, disgust, and pity. The tragedy of the poor nun wasn't just a story. It was the truth, and that truth still haunted that room. Death in the sacred room, where innocence was stained by crime, and the victim's spirit was still imprisoned there. The tragic truth about Sister Agnes and her death in the abandoned room left me utterly shocked and heartbroken. The footsteps and crying I had heard now had a horrifying context. Those weren't random sounds. They were the sounds of pain, of despair, of a trapped spirit. Father Michael explained that Sister Agnes's spirit is believed to still be confined to the room where she suffered the crime and sought death. That place was the last location of her life, and the tragic event bound her spirit there. I left Father Michael's office with a heavy heart. My initial fear was mixed with deep sadness and pity for Sister Agnes's fate. I no longer looked at the room at the end of the hallway the same way. It wasn't just an abandoned room. It was a tomb, A tomb of stained innocence, of ultimate pain, and of a spirit unable to find peace. Every time I walked past the area at the end of the church, I felt a cold draft radiating from that room. Colder than ever. I still heard faint footsteps from inside. And sometimes, I still heard faint crying, full of sadness. Those sounds no longer caused me extreme panic like before. Instead, they made me feel sad and sorrowful. The trapped spirit, Sister Agnes, she was still there, in the room where the tragedy happened. I don't know if her spirit will ever find peace. I hope that one day, her suffering will end, and she will be released. The ancient church in New Orleans, where I used to find peace, now also carried a terrifying hidden corner. A dark secret hidden behind the old wooden door at the end of the hallway. The story of Sister Agnes is a constant reminder of the fragility of life, of the crimes that can happen in the most sacred places, and of the trapped spirits, unable to find peace, forever haunting the place they departed. Haunting from the end of the hallway will forever be a part of my visits to the church. And I will never forget the story of Sister Agnes, the beautiful, devout woman who died tragically in that room. If you enjoyed these true horror stories, or stories based on accounts and unexplained mysteries, like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on the channel to follow our latest videos. We will bring you more terrifying and haunting stories. Thank you for listening.